Rebecca Lawn was found sitting on her porch, blood on her hands and silence in her eyes, while her 3 children lay dead inside the house, no signs of struggle, no forced entry, and no one else there that night but her. It was just after midnight when the first flashing lights arrived on Elm Street, casting blue and red reflections on the quiet windows of a neighborhood that rarely saw anything more exciting than a power outage. That night, however, something terrible had happened inside the small yellow house at 1621 Elm, something no one could make sense of, even after seeing it with their own eyes. 3 children, Ava, Lily, and Noah Lawn, were found dead in their beds. Their mother, Rebecca Lawn, sat quietly on the front steps in a bloodstained t-shirt, staring blankly ahead as paramedics moved past her. She didn't scream or cry. She didn't speak. Her hands were trembling slightly, but otherwise, she seemed too calm for a woman who had just lost everything. The responding officer, a rookie named Jared Holmes, later said it was the silence that disturbed him most. No signs of struggle. No blood in the bedrooms. The children looked as if they had simply gone to sleep and never woken up. Their small faces were peaceful. Their blankets were still neatly tucked in. It was unnatural. And that's what made it horrifying. One by one, paramedics checked for signs of life. One by one, they shook their heads. News of the tragedy spread quickly. Neighbors stood on their porches, watching in stunned silence. Some wept openly. Others whispered theories and fears. Everyone in the neighborhood knew Rebecca. She was the quiet widow who worked at the library and walked her children to school every morning. Ava was always reading. Lily liked to collect shiny things. Noah was obsessed with dinosaurs. Just a day earlier, they'd been playing in the yard, blowing bubbles under the sun. Now their house had become a crime scene. The medical examiner arrived. Within the hour, detectives followed. The children's father had died in a car crash 2 years earlier, leaving Rebecca alone to raise them. She never dated. She never complained. Everyone said she loved her kids fiercely. So how could something like this happen? Inside the house, police found no signs of forced entry. The doors were locked from the inside. The windows were sealed. Nothing appeared stolen or out of place. It was as if the killer had simply walked in, committed an unthinkable act, and vanished, leaving no trace, no noise, not even a footprint. Rebecca was taken in for questioning, but she barely spoke. She said she went to bed around 10:30 p.m. And when she woke up hours later, the house felt wrong. She walked to the children's rooms and found them cold and still. She claimed she had no idea what happened. She had no enemies. No explanation. Just the same look in her eyes, hollow, tired, unreachable. As the sun rose over Maple Grove, it was clear nothing would ever be the same again. A mother had lost her children. A town had lost its sense of safety. And somewhere in that quiet neighborhood, a terrifying question began to grow. Was this a tragedy no one saw coming, or a crime hiding in plain sight? The investigation began before the sun had fully risen. Detectives moved through the Lawn home with careful precision, examining every surface, every drawer, every corner. They photographed the neatly made beds, the untouched breakfast cereal still sitting in the pantry, and the row of children's shoes lined up by the door. Nothing seemed out of place. That was what bothered them. Crime scenes, especially violent ones, were rarely this clean. There were no broken locks, no shattered glass, no smeared fingerprints. The only sign that anything had happened at all was the stillness of the 3 small bodies and the strange calmness of their mother. Rebecca was brought in for further questioning. She remained quiet, her eyes dark with exhaustion. When asked to recount the evening, she repeated the same simple story. She made dinner around 6, helped Ava with her science homework, gave the twins a bath, and put them to bed around 8:30. After that, she read a book, washed a few dishes, and went to sleep. She didn't hear anything unusual. No screams. No footsteps. Just silence until she woke up and discovered the nightmare. Detectives didn't know what to make of her. Some thought she was in shock. Others weren't so sure. Her arms bore faint red marks, scratches that she claimed came from her cat. But there was no cat. When asked again, she said maybe she scratched herself during sleep. Her story was inconsistent. But not enough to arrest her. Not yet. The autopsy reports came back 2 days later. All 3 children had died from asphyxiation, smothered, most likely with a pillow or soft object. There were no defensive wounds. No bruises on their arms or faces. The killer had taken great care. It was done quietly, methodically, without rage. It was almost gentle. This detail disturbed investigators more than anything. It suggested either a cold, calculated killer or someone close to the children. Someone they trusted. Someone they didn't fight. Rebecca was now the only person on their list. She had no alibi. She was the only adult in the house that night. But her life didn't fit the usual pattern of such crimes. She wasn't financially desperate. She had no history of mental illness. There were no drugs or alcohol in her system. No abuse reports. Her friends and co-workers described her as private but kind, protective of her kids, and completely devoted to them since her husband's death. Still, doubts began to grow. Why wasn't she more emotional? Why hadn't she called 911 immediately after finding the children? She waited nearly 10 minutes, wandering the house first. Her behavior felt off. Not hysterical. Not grieving. Just distant. Rumors began to spread through the community. Some said she had been acting strange lately, quieter than usual. Others claimed she had trouble sleeping, that she seemed paranoid. But no one had ever imagined this. Without evidence, police couldn't charge her. But they didn't take their eyes off her either. She was a grieving mother, or she was a killer. And until they knew which one, Rebecca Lawn remained at the center of a case that had turned Maple Grove upside down. A week after the children's funeral, a plain white envelope arrived at the Maple Grove Police Department. No return address. No fingerprints. Inside was a single sheet of paper with just a few words, written in thick black marker. She was warned. He was watching. It was signed with a crude drawing of an eye. Detectives were already drowning in dead ends, but this message changed everything. Until now, they had believed the case was a tragic domestic crime, a mother snapping under pressure. But this note suggested something else, that Rebecca may not have been alone in the events leading to her children's deaths. They returned to the Lawn house to search again, more thoroughly this time. Behind a row of old board games in a hallway closet, they found a small, sealed showbox. Inside were 7 more letters. All of them short. All typed or printed in blocky handwriting. The earliest one was dated nearly 6 months before the murders. Each message was vague, yet threatening. Protect them while you can. He never forgets. The circle is almost closed. Rebecca had never mentioned any of this. When confronted, she said she didn't think they were serious. She thought they were some cruel prank, maybe from a kid at school or a stranger with a sick sense of humor. She had thrown away the first few, but when they kept coming, she started keeping them, not because she was scared, but because she wanted to figure out who was sending them. She admitted she never told the police because she feared they wouldn't believe her. Now detectives had a new question: who was sending the letters? And what did they mean? They sent the papers to handwriting experts and forensic analysts. It took weeks, but eventually, there was a breakthrough. Partial fingerprints were lifted from one of the earlier envelopes. They matched a man named Daniel Kravitz, a retired police officer living in a cabin 40 miles outside of town. He had no known connection to Rebecca, but further digging revealed something unexpected. He had once worked with Rebecca's husband, Mark Lawn. When Mark was a young officer in a neighboring town, Kravitz had left the force under suspicious circumstances. He was suspended after being involved in a controversial case involving a missing child. The child was never found and the case went cold. Kravitz quietly retired and disappeared from public view. No one in Maple Grove even remembered his name now. He was suddenly the most interesting person in the investigation. A team was sent to his property. The cabin was cluttered, falling apart, surrounded by tall trees and no neighbors in sight. Inside, investigators found several old journals filled with unhinged writings about justice, sin, and removing corrupted souls. More disturbing were the items in a locked back room: children's shoes, worn teddy bears, and faded photos of kids who didn't belong to him, including a blurry picture of Ava Lawn at a school play. It was no longer just a theory. Someone had been watching Rebecca and her children for months. And that someone was very real. The cabin was silent as investigators moved through it, their gloved hands brushing aside dusty curtains and piles of yellowed newspaper. Daniel Kravitz hadn't resisted when they arrived. He opened the door without a word and stood aside, watching coldly as they entered. He looked older than expected, with a sunken face and wild, tired eyes. He said nothing. He didn't need to. The house spoke for him. The back room was the most disturbing. The walls were lined with shelves holding dozens of labeled boxes, each one filled with odd items: children's socks, drawings, small toys. Some boxes had names. Others were marked only with dates. It felt more like a twisted archive than a home. Near the window, a wooden desk held a stack of handwritten journals. Most of the writing was strange and obsessive, full of phrases like purification and the calling. The tone shifted frequently, sometimes cold and orderly, other times frenzied and barely legible. In one entry, dated just a week before the Lawn children died, he had written, "The final ones are near. They live in that yellow house. 3 of them. So loud, so unaware. But I've watched. I've waited. The cycle is nearly finished." Among the boxes, one in particular made investigators freeze. Inside were photographs of Ava, Lily, and Noah, all taken from a distance. Some were clearly snapped while the children were at the park, others from behind bushes outside the school. One photo showed Rebecca sitting on her front porch, completely unaware of the camera trained on her. Next to the photos was a crumpled note card with their names written in shaky handwriting, along with their birth dates and the word marked. Kravitz was arrested immediately. His DNA was tested and matched fibers found on the Lawn children's blankets, barely traceable, but enough to link him. The evidence mounted quickly. Surveillance footage from a gas station 4 blocks from the Lawn house placed his car in the area just hours before the murders. More of his fingerprints were found on the letters sent to Rebecca. His laptop revealed that he had searched Rebecca's address, work schedule, and even local school calendars. He had been planning something for months, maybe longer, but the question still lingered: how had he entered the Lawn house? There were no signs of forced entry. No broken locks. No tampered windows. The only explanation, it seemed, was that he had found a way in while Rebecca slept. Perhaps the back door had been left unlocked. Perhaps he had a copy of a key. Or perhaps, as some whispered, she had let him in without realizing it. Rebecca's role remained unclear. There was no evidence she had ever met Kravitz. No emails, no calls, no ties of any kind except through her late husband. And even that was a loose connection. But her behavior still raised eyebrows. Her silence. Her lack of urgency. Her calm in the face of horror. As Kravitz was formally charged with 3 counts of murder, the town of Maple Grove exhaled in relief. But beneath that relief was something else: unease. Because even with the killer caught, not every question had an answer. And not every truth felt complete. The trial of Daniel Kravitz began under intense public scrutiny. News crews lined the steps of the courthouse. People from all over the state tuned in, drawn to the strange and chilling details of the case. Everyone wanted answers. Why had this retired officer murdered 3 innocent children? How had he chosen them? And most of all, had Rebecca Lawn really known nothing? Prosecutors presented a strong case. The physical evidence was undeniable. Kravitz's DNA was found on one of the children's blankets. His fingerprints matched. The letters. The journals were filled with obsessive entries describing the Lawn family in disturbing detail. Surveillance footage showed him driving through the neighborhood in the early hours of the morning the children died. And then there were the photographs, dozens of them, carefully taken over months, showing how long he had been watching. Kravitz never spoke during the trial. He showed no emotion, even as pictures of Ava, Lily, and Noah were shown to the courtroom. His defense attorneys tried to argue mental illness. They claimed he had suffered a psychological break, that the writings in his journals were the result of untreated delusions. But the prosecution countered with a clear, chilling pattern of planning. He had researched, stalked, and executed the crime with careful precision. Rebecca took the stand reluctantly. She looked thinner than before, her face drawn and tired. Her voice was steady, but soft. She answered every question, even when it clearly pained her. She admitted to hiding the letters, believing they were meaningless. She admitted she should have told someone. But she swore she had never met Daniel Kravitz, never even heard his name until the police told her. There was no evidence tying her directly to him. Still, the questions from the public remained. Why hadn't she reported the letters? Why had she waited so long to call 911? Why had her story been so vague? The prosecution didn't accuse her of anything she wasn't on trial. But outside the courthouse, people whispered. Some believed she was simply numb with grief. Others weren't so sure. After 2 weeks of testimony, the jury returned with a verdict. Daniel Kravitz was found guilty on all 3 counts of first-degree murder. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The town of Maple Grove finally had justice, at least on paper, but for Rebecca, there was no closure. The house was sold. She left town quietly, with no statement to the press. She disappeared from public life entirely. No interviews. No photos. Just gone. Some say she moved across the country. Others claim she changed her name. No one knows for sure, and yet, despite the conviction, doubt still lingers. Something about the case never felt fully closed. A mother alone in the house. No signs of a break-in. No struggle. No sound. Just 3 quiet deaths in the middle of the night. Daniel Kravitz was the killer, of that, the law is sure. But the question still echoes, did she truly know nothing, or was there more she never told?